The morning mist hung low over Portsmouth Harbour as King Charles III stepped from the royal car, his polished black shoes touching the ancient stones of the naval base. The salty air carried whispers of centuries past, of victories and losses that had shaped the very soul of Britain. Today was not just another ceremonial duty. Today, he would oversee the Lord High Admiral's division, a tradition that connected him to his ancestors who had stood on these same grounds, watching over the Royal Navy with pride and responsibility. Admiral Sir Marcus Weatherby stood at attention, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. At 62, he had served the crown for 40 years, rising through the ranks with distinction and honor. His weathered hands held a folder containing reports that would determine the future of naval operations across the globe. Behind him, rows of sailors stood in perfect formation, their faces a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet pride. Charles felt the familiar weight of duty settling on his shoulders. Since becoming king, every decision carried the burden of history and the hope of future generations. The Lord High Admiral's division was more than a military review, it was a sacred trust passed down through generations of monarchs. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had overseen countless such ceremonies, and now the responsibility was his alone. The wind picked up, causing the Union Jack to flutter proudly above the base. Charles remembered his own naval service, the discipline and camaraderie that had shaped his understanding of duty. Those experiences felt both distant and immediate as he prepared to inspect the men and women who served Britain's interests on the world's oceans. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood among the officers, her heart racing despite years of training. She had joined the Navy to honor her grandfather, who had served during World War II. Today's ceremony held special significance for her family, as she was being considered for promotion to captain. Her mother sat in the viewing area, clutching a photograph of Sarah's grandfather in his naval uniform. The ceremony began with the traditional inspection. Charles moved slowly down the lines of sailors, stopping occasionally to speak with individuals. His questions were thoughtful, personal. He asked leading seaman James Thompson about his family back in Yorkshire, and inquired about Petty Officer Maria Santos's recent deployment in the Mediterranean. These weren't scripted interactions but genuine moments of connection between the sovereign and his subjects. Admiral Weatherby watched with growing respect as the king demonstrated his deep understanding of naval operations. Charles asked detailed questions about equipment upgrades, crew welfare, and strategic positioning. It was clear that this was not merely ceremonial for him. He understood that behind every decision lay the lives of real people, families who depended on these men and women for their safe return home. Lieutenant David Chen had been selected to present the operational briefing. His hands trembled slightly as he opened his report. Chen's family had emigrated from Hong Kong when he was young, and joining the Royal Navy had been his way of giving back to the country that had welcomed them. Standing before the king, he felt the weight of that gratitude and responsibility. The briefing covered current naval deployments across the globe. British ships patrolled trade routes, provided humanitarian assistance, and maintained peace in troubled waters. Each mission represented countless hours of planning, training, and sacrifice. Charles listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification or offering insights from his own military experience. As the formal proceedings continued, personal stories emerged. Chief Petty Officer Robert Hayes had recently returned from a rescue mission in the Indian Ocean, where his ship had saved 37 refugees from a sinking vessel. His voice cracked slightly as he described pulling children from the water, their grateful eyes reflecting the humanity that drove his service. The king's response revealed his own emotional investment in these stories. He spoke of the Navy's role not just in defense but in representing British values of compassion and justice around the world. His words carried the authority of the crown but also the warmth of someone who understood the personal cost of service. Commander Mitchell stepped forward to receive her promotion recommendation. As Charles reviewed her service record, she thought of her grandfather, who had never lived to see her join the Navy. She could almost feel his presence, his pride radiating through the morning air. The king's words of commendation brought tears to her eyes, and she saw her mother weeping with joy in the crowd. The ceremony highlighted the delicate balance between tradition and modernity that defined the contemporary Royal Navy. Ancient customs like the Lord High Admiral's division maintained connections to centuries of naval heritage, while cutting-edge technology and evolving global challenges demanded constant adaptation. Charles embodied this balance, honoring the past while embracing the future. Young midshipman Emma Foster represented the future of the Navy. At 19, she had already shown exceptional promise in navigation and leadership. Her presence at the ceremony symbolized the changing face of the service, where gender and background mattered less than skill and dedication. Charles spoke with her about her aspirations, encouraging her ambitions to command her own vessel someday. The technical aspects of the review revealed the Navy's impressive capabilities. From advanced radar systems to sophisticated weaponry, British naval forces remained among the world's most capable. But Charles focused equally on the human elements: crew quarters, recreational facilities, and support systems for families. He understood that technology meant nothing without motivated, well-cared-for personnel. Admiral Weatherby presented the strategic overview, outlining challenges facing the Royal Navy in an increasingly complex world. Cybersecurity threats, climate change impacts on ocean conditions, and shifting geopolitical alliances required innovative responses. Charles asked probing questions about recruitment, retention, and training programs designed to address these evolving needs. The ceremony also recognized veterans who had served with distinction. Retired Captain William Morrison, now 85, had served during the Falklands conflict. His presence linked current sailors to their proud history, reminding everyone of the sacrifices made by previous generations. Charles spent considerable time with Morrison, listening to stories of courage and loss that had shaped British naval tradition. Personal sacrifices became evident as family members shared their experiences. Mrs. Jennifer Walsh spoke about the challenges of military marriage, raising children while her husband served months at sea. Her strength and resilience exemplified the families behind every sailor, the support systems that enabled their service. Charles acknowledged these contributions, understanding that naval strength depended on strong families and communities. The weather turned briefly stormy, with rain beginning to fall on the assembled crowd. Rather than seeking shelter, Charles continued the ceremony under darkening skies. This decision resonated powerfully with the sailors, who often faced harsh conditions at sea. His willingness to stand with them in discomfort demonstrated shared commitment to duty regardless of circumstances. Environmental considerations also featured prominently in discussions. The Royal Navy's efforts to reduce carbon emissions while maintaining operational effectiveness reflected broader societal concerns about climate change. Charles, a longtime environmental advocate, praised initiatives to develop cleaner technologies and more sustainable practices within naval operations. Intelligence briefings revealed the Navy's crucial role in gathering information and protecting national security. Specialized units worked quietly to safeguard British interests, their contributions often unrecognized by the public. Charles expressed gratitude for these hidden services, understanding that freedom often depended on actions that could never be publicly acknowledged. The ceremony concluded with the traditional march past, as sailors demonstrated their precision and pride. Each unit represented different aspects of naval service: surface ships, submarines, marines, and support personnel. Their synchronized movements reflected the coordination required for successful naval operations, where individual excellence contributed to collective strength. As the last notes of the national anthem faded across Portsmouth Harbor, Charles felt a profound connection to the institution he now led as sovereign. The Lord High Admiral's division had revealed not just military capability but human dedication, sacrifice, and hope. These men and women stood ready to serve wherever duty called, carrying with them the traditions and values that had defined British naval power for centuries. The personal stories shared during the ceremony would remain with Charles long after the formal proceedings ended. Each sailor represented a family, a community, a personal journey that had led to this moment of service. Their collective commitment to something greater than themselves embodied the highest ideals of citizenship and duty. Walking back to his car, Charles carried with him renewed appreciation for the burden and honor of command. The Lord High Admiral's division had reminded him that leadership meant more than issuing orders; it required understanding, compassion, and unwavering support for those who served. The weight of the crown felt heavier but also more purposeful as he prepared to face the challenges ahead. 3 weeks after the Portsmouth ceremony, King Charles found himself aboard HMS Victorious, a nuclear submarine cutting silently through the depths of the North Atlantic. The Lord High Admiral's division had revealed surface operations, but now he would witness the hidden world of submarine warfare that protected Britain 24 hours a day, unseen and unacknowledged by the public above. Commander Patricia Blackwood had spent 15 years underwater, rising to become one of the Royal Navy's most respected submarine captains. Her crew of 130 men and women operated in conditions that tested human endurance and psychological strength. The submarine's cramped quarters and artificial environment created unique challenges that required exceptional leadership and unwavering trust between crew members. The King's visit to the submarine base at Foslane had been kept secret for security reasons. Only essential personnel knew of his presence as he descended into the vessel that would become his temporary home for the next 48 hours. The experience would provide him with unprecedented insight into the sacrifices and skills required for underwater service. Lieutenant Mark Stevens had joined the submarine service to follow his father's footsteps, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of life beneath the waves. The constant hum of machinery, the recycled air, and the knowledge that tons of water pressed against the hull created a unique form of stress. Today, with the King aboard, that pressure felt even more intense. Charles adapted quickly to the submarine's confined spaces, moving carefully through narrow passages designed for efficiency rather than comfort. He observed crew members performing their duties with quiet professionalism, each person understanding that their role was critical to the boat's safety and mission success. The submarine operated as a single organism, with every individual contributing to its survival and effectiveness. Chief Petty Officer Rachel Murphy had served on submarines for 12 years, longer than most women in the service. Her expertise in sonar operations made her invaluable to the crew's ability to navigate safely and detect potential threats. She explained to Charles how sound traveled underwater, how submarine crews listened to the ocean's secrets, interpreting the acoustic signatures of ships, whales, and underwater geology. The submarine's mission involved patrolling waters where British interests might be threatened by foreign vessels. This cat-and-mouse game played out in 3 dimensions, with submarines tracking each other through skill, technology, and intuition. Charles learned about the delicate balance between remaining hidden and gathering necessary intelligence, understanding how submarine crews operated under constant tension. Seaman First Class Alex Rodriguez had grown up in Manchester, far from any ocean, but had been drawn to submarine service by its technical challenges. He maintained the vessel's complex systems, ensuring that everything from life support to propulsion functioned perfectly. His work required absolute precision. A single mistake could endanger the entire crew. Charles watched him calibrate sensitive equipment, appreciating the mathematical precision required for underwater operations. The psychological aspects of submarine service became apparent as Charles spoke with crew members about their experiences. Months underwater, separated from families and sunlight, tested mental resilience in ways that surface ships never could. The submarine service attracted people who could handle isolation and confinement while maintaining peak performance under pressure. Dr. Emma Sinclair served as the boat's medical officer, responsible for maintaining crew health in an environment where evacuation was often impossible. She had treated everything from appendicitis to psychological crises while submerged, making life-or-death decisions without outside consultation. Her stories revealed the resourcefulness and adaptability required when traditional medical support was unavailable. The submarine's nuclear reactor provided virtually unlimited underwater endurance, but this capability came with enormous responsibility. The engineering crew, led by Lieutenant Commander George Wallace, maintained systems that could power a small city. Wallace explained the safety protocols and redundant systems that prevented accidents, helping Charles understand the technical expertise required for nuclear submarine operations. Personal sacrifices became evident as crew members shared their family situations. Petty Officer Helen Carter had missed her daughter's graduation while on patrol, maintaining radio silence that prevented even emergency communications. These sacrifices multiplied across every crew member, creating a collective dedication that transcended individual concerns. The submarine's intelligence-gathering capabilities remained classified, but Charles observed the sophisticated equipment and highly trained personnel responsible for collecting information vital to national security. Specialized technicians monitored communications, tracked vessel movements, and gathered data that informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of government. Environmental challenges underwater differed dramatically from surface operations. The ocean's pressure, temperature variations, and acoustic properties created a three-dimensional battlefield where traditional navigation methods failed. Submarine crews relied on advanced sonar, satellite navigation during surface periods, and dead reckoning when all other systems failed. Meals aboard the submarine represented small moments of normalcy in an abnormal environment. Charles joined the crew for dinner, sharing simple food prepared in the galley's cramped conditions. Conversations revealed the humor and camaraderie that sustained morale during long deployments. These informal interactions often proved more revealing than formal briefings. The submarine's weapon systems remained ready for deployment at all times, though their use would represent failure of diplomatic solutions. Torpedo rooms contained devastating firepower that could sink surface vessels or engage other submarines. Charles met the weapons specialists who maintained this capability, understanding the gravity of their responsibilities. Sleep aboard the submarine followed unusual patterns dictated by watch schedules and operational requirements. Hot bunking, where crew members shared beds in rotating shifts, demonstrated the efficient use of limited space. Charles experienced the challenge of resting while machinery hummed constantly and the knowledge that danger might emerge without warning. Communication with the outside world occurred only during scheduled periods when the submarine surfaced or raised communication masts. Families waited weeks for brief messages confirming their loved one's safety. Charles observed the emotional impact of these communications, watching crew members struggle with connection and separation from their normal lives. The submarine's role in nuclear deterrence remained unspoken but understood by everyone aboard. As part of Britain's nuclear triad, submarine-launched ballistic missiles provided assured second strike capability that deterred potential aggressors. This responsibility weighed heavily on every crew member, from the captain to the newest recruit. Training exercises revealed the submarine's capabilities and limitations. Emergency drills tested crew responses to flooding, fire, and system failures that could prove catastrophic underwater. Charles participated where possible, gaining appreciation for the split-second decisions and coordinated responses required for survival in hostile environments. Navigation beneath the waves required different skills than surface sailing. Submarine navigators used astronomical positioning, inertial guidance systems, and careful dead reckoning to maintain accurate positioning while submerged. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell explained how underwater currents, magnetic variations, and acoustic anomalies affected their calculations. The submarine's encounters with marine life provided moments of wonder amid this serious military mission. Whale songs detected on sonar equipment reminded everyone of the ocean's natural inhabitants. These encounters sometimes complicated operations, as submarine crews had to distinguish between biological and artificial sounds that might indicate threats. Maintenance work continued constantly underwater, with crew members performing repairs and adjustments that kept complex systems functioning. The submarine carried extensive spare parts and tools, but creative solutions often became necessary when standard procedures failed. This self-reliance characterized submarine service, where help was rarely available from outside sources. The submarine's return to port marked the end of Charles's underwater experience, but the impact would last much longer. Surfacing revealed the sun and sky that crew members had missed during their deployment. The transition from artificial environment to natural light symbolized the sacrifices made by submarine personnel in service to their country. As HMS Victorious entered port, families gathered to welcome their returning sailors. These emotional reunions highlighted the personal cost of submarine service, the relationships strained by long separations and dangerous missions. Charles witnessed tears of relief and joy as crew members embraced loved ones who had waited anxiously for their return. The submarine's mission reports would remain classified, but Charles carried with him new understanding of the hidden guardians who protected Britain beneath the waves. These men and women operated in conditions that tested human limits, maintaining vigilance against threats that the public never knew existed. Debriefing sessions revealed the submarine's successful completion of its patrol mission. Intelligence gathered during the deployment would inform future operations and strategic planning. The crew's professionalism and skill had ensured mission success while maintaining the secrecy essential to submarine warfare. Charles left HMS Victorious with profound respect for submarine personnel and deeper appreciation for the invisible aspects of national defense. The Lord High Admiral's division had shown him the public face of naval service, but this underwater experience revealed the hidden sacrifices and capabilities that truly secured British interests in an uncertain world. The emergency call reached Buckingham Palace at 3 in the morning. HMS Cumberland, a Type 45 destroyer, had encountered a massive storm while conducting humanitarian operations in the South Pacific. The ship was in distress, with 40-foot waves battering its hull and engine problems threatening its ability to maintain course. King Charles, awakened by his private secretary, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Captain James Morrison had commanded HMS Cumberland for 2 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for the ferocity of this unexpected typhoon. The storm had developed rapidly, catching the destroyer while it was evacuating civilians from a volcanic eruption on a remote island. Now, with 300 refugees aboard in addition to his crew of 200, Morrison faced the greatest challenge of his naval career. Charles insisted on monitoring the crisis from the Admiralty's operations center, despite protocol suggestions that he remain at the palace. The situation required the personal attention of the Lord High Admiral, and he would not delegate this responsibility while British sailors faced mortal danger. The drive through London's empty streets gave him time to consider the weight of command and the lives that hung in the balance. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh served as Cumberland's executive officer, second in command during the crisis. She had joined the Navy to prove herself in a traditionally male environment, earning respect through competence and courage. Now, as waves crashed over the destroyer's deck and the ship struggled against nature's fury, her leadership would be tested beyond anything the Naval Academy had taught her. The operations center buzzed with controlled urgency as naval officers coordinated rescue efforts. Real-time satellite imagery showed the storm's massive scale, with wind speeds exceeding 120 miles per hour and waves that could snap a destroyer in half. Multiple ships were being redirected to assist Cumberland, but they were hours away from the disaster zone. Chief Petty Officer Michael O'Brien had spent 25 years at sea, but he had never experienced waves like these. The destroyer climbed mountainous swells before plunging into valleys that seemed to have no bottom. Each impact sent shockwaves through the hull, testing the ship's structural limits. O'Brien worked frantically to keep the engines running while water poured into compartments never designed to handle such punishment. The refugees aboard Cumberland added complexity to an already desperate situation. Families who had fled the volcanic eruption now faced a different kind of natural disaster. Many had never been on a ship before, and the destroyer's violent motion left them terrified and seasick. Navy personnel struggled to provide comfort and safety while fighting for their own survival. Charles studied weather reports and engineering assessments, understanding that every decision could mean life or death for hundreds of people. The destroyer's engines were failing, its communications equipment was damaged, and the storm showed no signs of weakening. Traditional rescue methods were impossible in these conditions, requiring innovative solutions that pushed the boundaries of naval capabilities. Leading seaman Emma Foster had volunteered for the humanitarian mission because her own family had been refugees during World War II. Now, as she helped evacuate families to the destroyer's most protected areas, she drew strength from her grandparents' stories of survival. The irony was not lost on her that she might face the same desperate struggle for survival that had driven her to serve others. The ship's medical officer, Lieutenant David Chen, worked to treat injuries caused by the violent motion and provide care for vulnerable refugees. His sick bay was overwhelmed with patients suffering from seasickness, cuts from flying debris, and panic attacks brought on by the terrifying conditions. Chen made difficult decisions about who needed immediate attention while the ship bucked like an angry horse. Naval architects in London analyzed Cumberland's structural reports, calculating how much punishment the destroyer could withstand before catastrophic failure. The ship's design included safety margins, but this storm exceeded all projected scenarios. Engineers worked through the night to develop solutions that might keep the destroyer afloat until rescue arrived. Charles spoke directly with Captain Morrison via emergency communications, offering support and gathering first-hand information about conditions aboard Cumberland. Morrison's voice remained calm despite the desperate circumstances, embodying the naval tradition of grace under pressure. His crew looked to him for leadership, and he would not let them see his own fears about their survival chances. The storm's psychological impact proved as dangerous as its physical effects. Crew members struggled with exhaustion as they worked around the clock to keep their ship afloat. The constant noise of wind and waves, combined with the destroyer's violent motion, created disorientation and stress that threatened decision-making capabilities when clear thinking was most crucial. Rescue Coordinator Admiral Patricia Blackwood directed operations from her headquarters, juggling resources across the Pacific to mount an effective response. She had learned crisis management through decades of experience, but this situation required her to risk additional ships and personnel in conditions that made rescue attempts extremely hazardous. The destroyer's damage control teams worked in conditions that tested human endurance. Petty Officer Helen Carter led efforts to shore up weakened hull sections while water poured in faster than pumps could remove it. Her team welded emergency patches underwater, performed repairs in flooded compartments, and demonstrated the courage that naval training instilled in every sailor. Communication with families back home became impossible as Cumberland's radio equipment failed. Loved ones watched news reports with growing anxiety, knowing their fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters faced mortal danger but having no information about their fate. This uncertainty created its own form of suffering for families already accustomed to the worries of military service. Charles coordinated with international partners who offered assistance from nearby naval forces. Australian and New Zealand ships altered course to help, while American aircraft prepared to drop emergency supplies if weather permitted. The crisis demonstrated how naval cooperation transcended national boundaries when human lives were at stake. The refugees' stories emerged as crew members worked to keep them safe. The Patel family had fled their home with only the clothes on their backs when the volcano erupted. Maria Santos clutched her infant daughter while praying in Spanish for deliverance from this nightmare. Their vulnerability reminded everyone aboard Cumberland why they had joined the Navy, to protect those who could not protect themselves. Engineering miracles occurred in Cumberland's engine room as Chief O'Brien and his team improvised solutions to keep propulsion systems functioning. They cannibalized parts from non-essential equipment, rerouted power systems, and performed repairs that should have been impossible in these conditions. Their determination represented the naval tradition of never giving up the ship. The storms I passed over Cumberland briefly, providing a surreal moment of calm amid the chaos. For 20 minutes, the destroyer floated in relatively peaceful seas while hurricane winds raged in a perfect circle around them. This respite allowed crucial repairs and gave everyone aboard a psychological boost that helped them prepare for the storm's second half. Weather forecasters tracked the typhoon's movement, searching for patterns that might indicate when conditions would improve enough for rescue operations. The storm's size and intensity broke historical records, creating a natural disaster that would be studied for years. But, for those aboard Cumberland, meteorological significance mattered less than survival. Charles remained in the operations center through the night, refusing to leave while British sailors fought for their lives. His presence inspired the crisis response team, who understood that their sovereign shared their concern for every person aboard the destroyer. The weight of command had never felt heavier, but his duty was clear. Dawn brought no relief as the storm continued its assault on Cumberland. The destroyer had survived the night, but damage reports painted a grim picture. Hull integrity was compromised, engines were operating at reduced capacity, and the ship was listing badly to starboard. Time was running out for rescue efforts to succeed. The first rescue ship, HMS Dragon, arrived on scene as the storm began to weaken. Captain and Stevens brought her destroyer as close as possible to Cumberland, but transferring people between ships in these seas remained extremely dangerous. Rescue swimmers prepared for operations that would test their skills and courage to the limits. Cumberland's crew worked with mechanical precision despite their exhaustion and fear. Each person knew their role in preparing for evacuation procedures that had been drilled countless times but never performed in conditions like these. The refugees trusted their rescuers completely, understanding that their survival depended on the skills and dedication of people they had only recently met. The rescue operation began as winds dropped to survivable levels but seas remained mountainous. Royal Navy rescue swimmers entered waters that could kill within minutes, attaching safety lines and guiding people to rescue baskets. Each transfer risked multiple lives, but there was no alternative to this dangerous ballet between ships rising and falling on opposite sides of massive waves. Charles monitored each stage of the rescue, understanding that success would depend on split-second timing and flawless execution by people performing beyond human limits. The Lord High Admiral's division had shown him ceremony and tradition, but this crisis revealed the true heart of naval service, ordinary people performing extraordinary acts when duty demanded everything they had to give. The rescue operation continued through the morning hours as HMS Dragon and 2 other destroyers worked systematically to evacuate every person from the crippled Cumberland. King Charles remained in the operations center, watching real-time footage as Navy rescue swimmers performed miracles of courage in conditions that challenged human endurance. Each successful transfer brought relief, but hundreds of people still remained aboard the sinking destroyer. Captain Stevens coordinated the multi-ship rescue with precision that reflected decades of training and experience. Her crew operated with mechanical efficiency despite the dangerous conditions, understanding that any mistake could cost multiple lives. The rescue swimmers, led by Chief Petty Officer Mark Thompson, entered the churning waters repeatedly, each trip risking their lives to save others. The refugees showed remarkable courage as they prepared for transfer to the rescue ships. Families who had already lost everything to the volcanic eruption now faced another test of survival. Ana Rodriguez held her 3 young children close as Navy personnel explained the evacuation procedure. Her husband had died in the volcanic eruption, and these sailors represented her family's only hope for survival. Lieutenant Commander Walsh supervised Cumberland's evacuation procedures while simultaneously fighting to keep the destroyer afloat. Her damage control teams had performed miracles during the night, but the ship was slowly losing the battle against the sea. Water continued entering faster than pumps could remove it, and the hull's structural integrity was failing section by section. Charles spoke with Prime Minister Henderson via secure telephone, providing updates on the rescue operation and discussing the political implications of the crisis. International media were covering the story extensively, and the government needed to demonstrate that British forces could protect both their own personnel and innocent civilians in extreme circumstances. The medical evacuation proved particularly challenging as Dr. Chen worked to transfer patients who required immediate hospital care. Several refugees had suffered serious injuries during the storm, and 2 Navy personnel had been hurt in rescue operations. Medical helicopters waited offshore, unable to approach in the continuing high winds, forcing difficult decisions about treatment priorities. Petty Officer Carter led her damage control team in a desperate effort to buy time for the evacuation. They sealed compartments, reinforced weakened sections, and rerouted systems to keep Cumberland operational. Their work was performed in flooded spaces with the constant knowledge that the ship might break apart at any moment, but they never hesitated in their duty to their shipmates. The storm's gradual weakening allowed air support to join the rescue operation. Royal Air Force helicopters launched from an aircraft carrier positioned beyond the typhoon's range, flying dangerous missions to evacuate the most vulnerable refugees. The helicopter crews, led by squadron leader Jennifer Hayes, navigated through turbulent conditions that tested their aircraft's limits. Families back home watched news coverage with mixed emotions as the rescue operation unfolded. Mrs. Catherine Morrison, Captain Morrison's wife, maintained a brave face for their children while privately wrestling with fears for her husband's safety. Military spouses understood the risks of naval service, but television coverage made this crisis immediate and personal. The international cooperation during the rescue operation demonstrated naval traditions that transcended national boundaries. Australian and New Zealand ships provided support despite the risks to their own crews. American aircraft delivered emergency supplies and medical equipment. The crisis showed how navies worldwide shared common values of duty and humanitarian service. Cumberland's engineering spaces told the story of heroism below decks. Chief O'Brien and his team had kept the engines running through the night despite flooding that reached their waists. Now, as the ship settled deeper in the water, they prepared for their own evacuation while ensuring that power remained available for the rescue operation. The refugees' gratitude became evident as they reached safety aboard the rescue ships. Despite their own losses and trauma, many thanked their rescuers in multiple languages. Children who had been terrified during the storm now smiled as sailors provided them with food, dry clothes, and comfort. These human moments reminded everyone why they served. Charles authorized the deployment of additional resources as the rescue operation expanded beyond initial projections. The scale of the crisis required support from multiple commands, and coordination between different services tested communication and command structures. Every decision carried consequences for people whose lives hung in the balance. The psychological impact on Cumberland's crew became apparent as they prepared to abandon their ship. Sailors developed emotional bonds with their vessels, and leaving Cumberland felt like abandoning a family member. Captain Morrison would be the last person to leave, following naval tradition that emphasized a commander's responsibility for everyone under their care. Weather forecasters provided crucial updates as conditions gradually improved throughout the day. The typhoon was moving away from the rescue area, but dangerous seas would continue for hours. Rescue coordinators used this information to plan the final phases of evacuation, knowing that time remained critical for the most vulnerable personnel. The successful transfer of the last refugees marked a turning point in the operation, but Navy personnel still remained aboard Cumberland. These sailors had volunteered to stay behind, maintaining essential systems and continuing damage control efforts while their shipmates were evacuated first. Their sacrifice embodied the naval tradition of placing others' safety above their own. Admiral Blackwood faced difficult decisions about salvage operations as Cumberland's condition deteriorated. The destroyer contained classified equipment and sensitive materials that could not fall into unauthorized hands. Demolition charges were prepared as a last resort, though everyone hoped the ship could be saved through heroic effort and favorable weather. The media coverage brought global attention to the rescue operation, highlighting both the humanitarian mission that had preceded the crisis and the exceptional courage shown by all involved. News reports praised the international cooperation and professional competence demonstrated during the emergency, but those directly involved remained focused on completing their mission successfully. Dr. Chin completed the medical evacuation of his patients before preparing for his own transfer to HMS Dragon. His sickbay had treated everyone from refugee children to veteran sailors, demonstrating the medical challenges of disaster response in maritime environments. The experience would influence naval medical procedures for years to come. The final phase of evacuation required Cumberland's crew to leave behind personal belongings and ship's equipment that represented years of service and memories. Leading Seaman Foster took one last look at the destroyer that had been her home for 2 years, knowing she might never see it again. The emotional cost of abandoning ship was as real as any physical injury. Captain Morrison supervised the destruction of classified materials as Cumberland's list increased dangerously. Secure communications equipment was disabled, operational plans were destroyed, and sensitive navigation aids were rendered inoperable. These procedures protected national security even as they acknowledged that the ship was beyond saving. The helicopter evacuation of Cumberland's final crew members represented the most dangerous phase of the entire operation. Wind conditions remained marginal for flight operations, and the destroyer's motion made precision flying extremely hazardous. Squadron leader Hayes personally piloted the most critical missions, understanding that any accident could still turn success into tragedy. Charles remained in contact with rescue coordinators as the operation entered its final hours. The successful evacuation of all refugees and most Navy personnel represented a triumph of skill, courage, and international cooperation. However, the fate of Cumberland itself remained uncertain as salvage crews prepared for their own dangerous mission. The ship's final moments came as structural damage reached critical levels. Cumberland's hull split amidships as mountainous waves continued their assault, and Captain Morrison gave the order to abandon ship. The destroyer that had served with distinction in multiple conflicts would become another victim of the sea's unlimited power, but not before her crew had demonstrated the values that define naval service. The aftermath of the crisis would bring investigations, decorations, and policy changes, but those directly involved focused on immediate concerns: reuniting refugees with surviving family members, providing medical care for the injured, and supporting sailors who had lost their ship. The human dimensions of the crisis would continue long after the headlines faded. HMS Dragon's arrival at port brought emotional scenes as families reunited with their loved ones. The refugees faced uncertain futures, but they were alive because of the courage and skill of sailors who had risked everything to save them. These strangers had become heroes in the truest sense, earning gratitude that would last lifetimes. Charles traveled to meet the survivors personally, understanding that his presence would honor their sacrifice and acknowledge their courage. The Lord High Admiral's division had begun with ceremony and tradition, but it concluded with the ultimate demonstration of naval values: ordinary people performing extraordinary acts when duty demanded everything they possessed. The investigation that followed would analyze decisions made under extreme pressure, but it would conclude that Cumberland's crew and their rescuers had performed beyond reasonable expectations. Their actions had saved hundreds of lives and demonstrated the continuing relevance of naval service in an uncertain world. The memorial service for HMS Cumberland honored both the ship and the values she represented. The destroyer had served her final mission by protecting those who could not protect themselves, embodying the humanitarian role that complemented military capabilities. Her loss reminded everyone that freedom and safety came at a price paid by those willing to serve others. King Charles reflected on the lessons learned through his oversight of the Lord High Admiral's division. From the ceremonial review at Portsmouth to the desperate rescue in the South Pacific, he had witnessed the full spectrum of naval service. The experience had deepened his understanding of leadership and strengthened his commitment to supporting those who served under his command. The refugees would rebuild their lives in new countries, carrying with them memories of the sailors who had saved them. Their children would grow up knowing that strangers had risked their lives for people they had never met, demonstrating values that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. The naval tradition continued, strengthened by the courage shown during the crisis. New sailors would learn about Cumberland's final mission, understanding that they joined a service that valued honor above safety and duty above comfort. The Lord High Admiral's division had revealed the heart of naval service, people committed to ideals larger than themselves, willing to sacrifice everything to protect others and serve their country with distinction.